Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Analysing Anfield from the Liverpool Echo. I'm Beth Lindop. I'm joined by Keifer MacDonald. How are we, Keifer? Enjoying the sunshine?
I am, yeah, a bit burnt, as those watching on YouTube I'm sure will be able to see. Had a weekend in the sun, which was great until you have to deal with the after effects. But bit of sunshine, a bit of European football, can't really complain, can you?
You can't at all. Now, before we dive into today's pod, because we've got quite a bit to get through, just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors, NordVPN. To get your best discount off your NordVPN plan, go to nordvpn.com/bloodred. Our link will also give you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. There's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee, and the link is in the podcast episode description box, or as Joe Rimmer likes to sort of concisely sum it all up, get on board with Nord. You won't regret it. But you mentioned there, Keifer, sort of European football. How are you enjoying the Euros so far? Did you watch the England game last night?
Yeah, I've watched all 3 of the England games.
Are you regretting giving up 90 minutes of your time to watch that last night?
Yeah, I mean, pretty dreadful. I mean, normally, to be fair, with the international football, I'm not really a huge fan of it, but I do like the tournaments. I think it's kind of like a festival of football, isn't it? And it's kind of nice to switch off from kind of the day-to-day rigour of, club football and kind of how immersive you get in that. So I do like to kind of disconnect and kind of keep an eye on it. But yeah, I think the England games have been slightly underwhelming, haven't they? I mean, I've kind of really wanted Trent to, I think we said on the last podcast, which was just before the opening game, wasn't it? We kind of really wanted Trent to steal the show and make a statement for himself, wearing the number 8 shirt in a major tournament for England. I'm sure it's the stuff that kids dream about, and I'm sure Trent has done that as well. But I think just the whole England side, from players from Foden to Bellingham to Harry Kane, they've all kind of struggled really, and it's, as you say, it's been a bit underwhelming, and none more so than that 0-0 draw with Slovenia last night. Yeah,
we are going to focus on Trent. You say there he's obviously maybe struggled a little bit, and he has, but he isn't on his own. It does feel though like he has been scapegoated a little bit, sort of certainly from looking at reports in the media and on social media as well. A lot of the blame seems to have been, especially in that Denmark draw, seems to have been directed towards him. Do you think that's fair? Do you think it's unfair?
I think it's such a weird one, isn't it? Because I think Declan Rice summed it up quite well the other day. But before the Slovenia game, he said there was such a clamour to play Trent in midfield, and it felt like, that was almost England's secret weapon going into these finals. And, you're talking about a player who's won the Champions League, the Premier League, and helped Liverpool to kind of reach unprecedented levels of success in the Premier League in terms of like points tallies and stuff. And then all of a sudden, after 180 minutes for England, or probably even less actually, because he got subbed in the first 2 opening games, didn't he, in the second half. All of a sudden he's the problem, he's the one that needs to change, the system doesn't work, Southgate needs to go back to whatever. All of a sudden you've got the manager saying he misses Calvin Phillips and all this kind of weird chatter going on. But then I think, funny enough, when you throw someone like Conor Gallagher in there last night, all of a sudden it kind of shows that Trent isn't the problem, and perhaps he's the one, when you look at that team, who can do something different, break the lines, offer something that a Gallagher or Rice, and even like a Kobbie Mainoo, something he doesn't offer in terms of his ability to stretch defences and play balls in behind. But I just think I said it to you earlier, Beth, in the office, I think there's just so many good players in this England team that they feel more individual than a cohesive team, and they are probably better than the 2018 team that got to the semi-finals of the World Cup, and probably even the 2021 team that reached the finals of the Euros. But in terms of a collective, it feels like the balance is slightly off. You've got Bellingham, who's brilliant, but you've also got Foden, who are probably certainly this season have been the 2 main men for their clubs, and all of a sudden one, they maybe have to share that limelight, or Foden has to move out to the left and he wants to come into wide areas, but then you've got Harry Kane, who kind of drops into that space. All of a sudden Bukayo Saka hasn't got the people running in behind to help him, and even for a player like Trent as well, who thrives on having a runner, a Núñez, a Salah, that relationship he's built up at Liverpool with those two over the last couple of years. He hasn't really been able to utilise that skill set. And I think that's a really disappointing thing, because it feels like he's finally been given a stage and almost a trust of Southgate, and because he hasn't had that in the other tournaments that he's participated in. But it feels like then everything around him is pretty much broken.
Yeah, and you've sort of touched on it a little bit there, but it does feel like the way that this England team has been set up hasn't played to his strengths at all, really. You mentioned having runners in behind, and in the opening game against Serbia, it sort of felt like there wasn't a lot of that. Bukayo Saka was probably the only England player doing that for him, and then, you have Ollie Watkins comes on, Jarrod Bowen comes on, and they suddenly start to do that, but then Trent's not on the pitch. So it sort of feels like the conditions haven't been right for Trent to really excel. That being said, despite the fact that he came on as a substitute last night against Slovenia, the fact he was hooked not long after the halfway mark against both Serbia and Denmark, no England player has created more chances than Trent. I mean, considering he's been panned in the way that he has over the last week or so, it's not bad going if you're still coming out as the most creative player in the team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose that's the problem with international football is you get players who they maybe don't have not the credit in the bank, because I think that's probably the wrong term to use, but supporters, because they aren't the players at their own clubs, there's the patience obviously is kind of wears thinner, doesn't it? And whereas Liverpool, Trent might not have his most effective game, or I think fans will still be behind, but with England, I think especially it's quite toxic and quite difficult, isn't it? And I think Roy Keane was pretty spot on last night. He said, was kind of asked what the problem is with England and why it kind of goes from one extreme to the next. I mean, you're talking 3 weeks ago that they were the favourites to win a tournament, and it was finally time to deliver. Southgate's likely last tournament in charge of England, and then you're 10, 12 days into the tournament, and England, people are saying they're going to get knocked out in the round of 16, and Keane basically said that there's just such a toxic relationship there of there's never any middle ground in terms of never get too carried away or never get too down with the results. It kind of just goes
it's one extreme to another.
Yeah, and that can't be helpful for the players either, because we know there's obviously been a bit of backlash in the media, and certainly players like Trent have had that. But I think those who watch him week in, week out at Liverpool, and you talk about the new manager Arne Slot, he's going to be delighted to work with him. And I suppose England's loss will be Liverpool's game, because I think everyone knows what a fantastic player Trent is and what he's done over the last 5, 6, 7 years. And I know we said a few weeks ago that if he was to have a good tournament, it could maybe kickstart this new era for Liverpool, where he is this all singing, all dancing number 8. But in reality, if that isn't to be the case, I mean, there's still a fantastic player in there wherever he's deployed. It's just, at Liverpool, that team's going to be built around him, but that's never going to be the case really for international football, is it?
No, and I did think that Gareth Southgate's comments about Calvin Phillips and saying that England didn't really have a natural replacement for him were interesting, because the way he said it was almost equating the job that he wanted Trent to do with what Calvin Phillips did. And to me, that sort of speaks to the fact that he's not been used correctly in this England system, Trent, because I don't think we've seen enough for either club or country to suggest that he's a lone six. He's someone who's going to provide that defensive shield. That's not where his talents lie. Do you think maybe if he was given a run out, maybe in the number 8 position, obviously as his shirt number would suggest, that might benefit him a little bit more?
Yeah, it's hard to say, isn't it? Because I think that's always been the kind of the one criticism of Trent is maybe does he have the defensive discipline to not play midfield, but obviously right back, in those kind of one-on-one duels, does he go too far forward? Does he get caught out and leave a lot of space in behind? And I think going into the tournament, people were saying, if he was going to play in this deeper line position, it was going to be him and Rice. But I think the thing people forget is that Declan Rice played, the second half of last season where Arsenal were absolutely at their best. He played in the number 8 position, and it was Jorginho who played in the 6. So it's not just Trent who's in one of those two in the kind of the two-man pivot together. It wasn't just him who was in an unfamiliar position. You've got Rice, who's almost, I know he's a top-class defensive midfielder, but he's just played the last 6 months and probably the best football of his career higher up the pitch. And Trent at Liverpool, I think he's, especially over the last year, he's had that kind of, obviously, yes, he has been right back on the team sheet, and by formalities, that's where he is. But he kind of has that free role, doesn't he? And I think the last year of Klopp, the shackles are really off. But as I say, I don't think he's ever going to get that freedom with England just because of the other players you've got on the pitch. It's very much, the front four of, Saka, Kane, Bellingham, Foden, kind of let them do the damage. And I think at Liverpool, that's why we see the best of Trent, because he isn't told to play in that half space in a number 8 position or sit in the number 6 and do that. He can literally go wherever he wants. And that's why we see him popping up with last minute goals against Fulham, putting, brilliant crosses in from wide areas, or, playing balls from deep. He doesn't really have his remit is kind of so far and so wide that he isn't just restricted to one role. But as I say, I don't think that was ever going to be the case with England. But I mean, if he was to play the number 8, maybe some of that defensive discipline would be released from him, and maybe he could show some of his better qualities in the attacking third. But I feel like now Southgate's I feel like it would have been the perfect game to start Trent in last night. I know he'd played the two other games, so you could argue that maybe he was being rested, but it feels like Southgate took the easy decision last night in playing Gallagher and putting Trent on the bench. But I mean, it'll be interesting to see what he does now, because obviously there was a few lads who came off the bench last night and did quite well, Trent obviously being one of them. But I think the thing that if the last kind of 3 or 4 tournaments under Southgate I've said anything, it's that he doesn't really change teams during the tournament. He has his 11, will make changes in the final group game, but after that, it's very much the lads who you kind of tried and tested, and I'm not sure if Trent is one of those.
Yeah, I mean, he does come on last night. He comes off the bench, but he comes on at right back, which sort of felt like a bit of an acceptance from Southgate that Trent in midfield for this tournament at least isn't going to be the approach that he's going to take. If you're Arne Slot sat watching this game and taking notice of the way Trent's playing, as I'm sure he is, do you sort of take that as a little bit of a signal that next season he stays at right back, or do you think he will be more keen to try him in midfield and see how he goes?
I don't know. It's interesting, isn't it? I think, well, we said it a few weeks ago, I think one way or another there needs to kind of be some kind of clarity on what Trent Alexander-Arnold is. I think part of that is because you've got someone like Conor Bradley coming through, so Trent's role next season, you can't have someone like Conor Bradley playing the same amount of minutes that Tsimikas did, where he's hardly getting a look in. So I think one way or another, Trent will either be in midfield or he'll be the right back, and then you have to maybe devise another plan for Conor Bradley or whatnot. But in terms of Arne Slot, I mean, he'll be looking at, I don't think he'll be using this tournament specifically. I mean, he'll be looking at what Trent's done over the last nearly a decade now, and kind of where he's fired Liverpool to. And I mean, I said it to you, like, I've always been in the kind of camp that Liverpool kind of toppled the world, toppled Yoro, toppled the Premier League, whilst Trent was at full back. I mean, the relationship he had with Andy Robertson, Mo Salah, Jordan Henderson, he was just phenomenal, wasn't he? He used to dictate games, and I never really understood the clamour to move him, because I was like, oh, it's not broke, don't fix it. I mean, I think last season he reached over 100 goals and assists at the age of 25, which is just absolutely nuts. I mean, you talk about fullbacks who have defined the Premier League era. You talk about Ashley Cole, don't you, and players like that. But I don't think it'll be until after Trent plays that you kind of take a step back and think, wow, the numbers that he was putting together were that of a number 10 or that of a midfielder or an attacker. So it really is interesting, but I'm not sure. As I say, I think I've always been in the camp that Trent is better at right back, and I don't know if that's because you receive the ball, you've got the whole pitch to kind of look at. Mm-hmm. When you receive the ball in midfield, you're usually on the half turn, you've usually got men coming from all angles, you don't get as much time on the ball. But I mean, clearly, the England manager thinks that Trent can be a midfielder. Clearly Klopp thought that Trent could be a midfielder. Clearly Pep Lindop thought Trent could be a midfielder. So there must be some eagerness from Trent's part to play there. Obviously, we know he used to play there in the academy age group. So it will be interesting to see kind of what angle he takes, because Trent's 25, he's got a year left on his deal, but you'd imagine, fingers crossed, he signs that deal. All of a sudden, life after Mo Salah, Trent's going to be your new poster boy, isn't he? He's going to be the face of this Liverpool 2.0. So as I say, I just think one way or another there needs to be clarity.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely right. I think we've had this debate, haven't we, now for
so many times,
for a good couple of seasons, and we still don't really seem to be any closer to finding a resolution. So hopefully next season you won't be hearing us bang on about Trent in midfield or Trent at right back, and we'll know exactly where his best position is. Just while we're still on England, then I just want to touch on Joe Gomez. Obviously hasn't made it onto the pitch yet. It was, I was delighted for him getting in the squad. I thought he completely deserved it based off of his form this season. If you look at sort of one of England's biggest problems in the group stage, and certainly going into the knockout stages now, one of the biggest causes for concern is the lack of a real top quality left back. Kieran Trippier has obviously played there in the group stages, has maybe looked a little bit shaky. Luke Shaw, we know, isn't fully fit yet, hasn't been involved. You can't imagine him be playing 90 minutes anytime soon. So obviously somewhere that Joe Gomez maybe is his third favourite position on the pitch, but it's somewhere that he's played for Liverpool quite a bit last season, and he did a job there. If you were Gareth Southgate, would you be considering whacking Joe Gomez in at left back?
Yeah, and I would, and I think, if not because of Gomez's qualities. I mean, he's obviously a brilliant defender, but he's not going to win your games. But I think it might also help get the best out of Phil Foden as well. Mm-hmm. I think that we've seen with Gomez that he's a facilitator. He allows other players around him to be better. And the thing is, I always say, is whenever he comes in, you never really notice him, and that's like a really good thing as a defender, isn't it? Because you're not making mistakes. You're kind of just doing your job, going under the radar. Especially when you're at left back as well, and obviously he's not the all singing, all dancing kind of fullback that you get with Trent and Robertson in terms of bombing forward. But he's a bit more stable, and I think it's really important when you have a fullback on the other side who's often high and wide, and you do get that with Kyle Walker at times. But I think with Trippier, with him being a right-footed left back, there's a lot of times where he's kind of coming into Foden's space, isn't he? And I think that's maybe killing Foden a little bit. He's kind of having to go out wide when we know that he prefers to come in field a bit more and kind of be in those deadly situations. So if I was Southgate, I would be looking at that. And I think Trippier, did he get a calf injury in one of the games early doors? I mean, he obviously played last night, so you'd imagine he's fine. But in terms of tweaks, you could do that to maybe, unlock some of the attacking talent that is in that team. But I think Gary Neville said last night that he wouldn't be surprised if it was Walker who goes at left back, and then all of a sudden, as you say, Trent comes on last night at right back. Does he start there on Sunday? So it is certainly interesting. There's obviously a few Liverpool lads who might not make the direct difference, but they can certainly have an influence in this tournament if England are going to do well.
Yeah, moving on from England then, if we go over to Hungary, obviously one of the teams that are waiting to find out whether they've done enough to qualify as one of the 4 best third-place teams. Dominic Szoboszlai, obviously the captain. I mean, what have you made of his tournament so far? Obviously, I think Hungary as a collective have disappointed. They obviously lost to Switzerland, lost to Germany. Secure that really crucial last-minute win against Scotland to give themselves a chance at least of progressing to the knockout stages. Szoboszlai maybe slightly better in that Scotland game, but has sort of that malaise that we saw toward the end of his time at Liverpool. It's carried on a little bit, hasn't it, into his international tournament? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think he's had a really difficult 2024. I mean, he started the season, he was, like a house on fire. He was electric. He was kind of everything that Liverpool's midfield was lacking the previous season in terms of just being lethargic and kind of stifled of any creativity and driving runs forward. He kind of just came in and set the world alight. I mean, there was that brilliant goal against Aston Villa. I think at the end of August, start of September kind of thing, and everyone was like, wow, 3 or 4 games into his Liverpool career, like he is the man. I think Wolves away the following week, the following game even, he played in a number 6 role, or he played in a deeper defensive role. So you were kind of looking at him and McAllister at one point and thinking, McAllister's the one who's obviously been a bit of a slow burner. Hopefully he can kind of match Szoboszlai's level. But I think the turn of the year, they both just kind of flipped, didn't they? And it was Szoboszlai who obviously suffered the hamstring injury against Chelsea, and that kind of really killed any momentum he had. Obviously missed a cup final, missed 7-8 games, missed a few big games in there as well. I think he missed the Arsenal game at the Emirates, so that obviously would have been really disappointing for him. And then by the time he does come back, it's I think March time, and Liverpool are maybe running out of gas a little bit, and there's probably part of him that is probably still trying to play catch up to the speed of the Premier League. You've also got, I think he is a young player, having played in the Bundesliga, he will have had a winter break and stuff like this. So I think there are reasons to understand why he struggled. It wasn't a plain sailing season for him where he played 38 games and just wasn't, performing. I think there was kind of mitigating circumstances which you can let him off. And I think there's been enough flashes, haven't there, moments where you can say that's a really technical midfielder, and one that can certainly benefit Liverpool. But in terms of the Euro so far, I think Hungary as a whole, I mean, a few people were tipping them as maybe the dark horses. It was kind of similar to Turkey in the last Euros where they kind of just crashed and burned straight from minute one. But you just hope now if he gets another opportunity in the last 16, if they are to go through as one of the third place teams, maybe he can pick up a bit of form. But then I suppose the flip side to that is if he's sent home early and gets a few weeks off, he'll be back earlier in pre-season, gets more time to work with the new manager. He's involved more in the tours and all that kind of thing. So I suppose either way you look at it, it's a win-win for Liverpool. I don't think anyone aside from Szoboszlai would be too disappointed if they weren't to qualify or they were to get knocked out over the weekend. Yeah,
I think like you say, I definitely don't think it's time to panic for Liverpool just yet. I think we've seen flashes, we've seen glimpses of what he can do. It's now just about recovering that form and I suppose getting that bit of consistency, which hopefully with a sort of fullish pre-season under his belt, then we might get next season. Moving on to the Netherlands then, obviously they've gone through as one of the best third place teams in a really tough group, to be fair. They've probably disappointed in terms of the amount of points that they've got, certainly against Austria yesterday, although credit to Austria, they were exceptional. But I think one real bright spot for them, and certainly a bright spot for Liverpool, is Cody Gakpo. He scored 2 in 3 games playing on the left-hand side. He's scored the same amount of goals at this tournament as the entire England team. And that's now 5 goals at major tournaments for him. I mean, he just seems to be one of those players, when the lights shine the brightest on the international stage, certainly, he really excels.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think he's a really difficult player to assess because, you think of those first couple of weeks at Liverpool, he did struggle, but then all of a sudden, around the time of that 7-0 against Man United, obviously he scores the 2 goals in that game. And obviously the time that Roberto Firmino announced that he was leaving. And I always kind of go back to the mood around that, is that I don't think too many people, like sentiment aside, were disappointed that Firmino was leaving. I think people looked at Gakpo, they looked at Diaz, they looked at Salah, and they thought, well, that's a competent front three. And at the time, Gakpo was doing that false 9 role. And people, I remember I wrote a few pieces at the time saying he was kind of like the perfect heir to Firmino's throne. And really, he had a strong end to that season. But then, the start of last season, I don't think he was helped by Klopp. He started the first game of the season at Chelsea in midfield. And again, he was just another player who felt like he was playing catch-up for the whole campaign. He was a kind of a bit part player. Was mainly used in the Europa League, the Cups, the League Cup, that kind of thing. But in terms of the Premier League, he scored 8 goals, 5 assists. So he had a good return. But he just never felt like he was really given that run. And we saw a few glimpses of maybe the old Gakpo towards the end of the season, but it feels really weird because he kind of established himself at the World Cup. As you say, he scored 3 goals there for Holland. He played for PSV and captained them to the Eredivisie title. And this was all playing on the left. So when he came to Liverpool, you feel it would have made perfect sense to put him on the left. And as I say, Klopp used him, here, there, and everywhere. And I was having a look earlier. He played 9 times on the left last season, and only 2 of those were starts. And he got assists in both of those games. That kind of shows what he can do when given the opportunity. But I suppose you can probably make the case for all football. He's a player who needs rhythm and needs a run of games. And you can argue whether you're ever going to get that at Liverpool when they've got players like Jota, Diaz, Nunez, and so on. So it's a really interesting case. But I feel he's been quite refreshing. I know Holland lost last night 3-2 in the end, but Liverpool fans, I know the reaction on social media has been quite exciting because Slot surely as a Dutch native is going to be looking at that, and he's going to be aware of what he did in the Eredivisie as well. And certainly with the dynamic around Luis Diaz this summer, his future is very much in the air, as we kind of said on the last podcast. Barcelona are still sniffing around, and if you're talking about 60, 70 million for Diaz, whatever that may be, you're probably not going to find a replacement any cheaper than that. So if Liverpool were forced into the market, do they then bring in a younger player and then allow Gakpo to kind of be the starting, left winger? So I don't know. It is really interesting, but it has been really refreshing to kind of see Gakpo, because clearly last year he was bottom of the pile in terms of forwards. 17 Premier League starts in all competitions. That was, I think, Jota made more than that. Obviously, Jota made less than that. But I think Jota was injured for most of the season, wasn't he? But in terms of the other lads, Diaz, Salah, Nunez, they were clearly the kind of the preferred front three. And I don't think it was until the final weeks of the season that Nunez, when he kind of went off the boil a bit, that Gakpo kind of came back into the fold. But certainly, goals on the international stage is only good news for Liverpool, isn't it?
Definitely. I suppose to sort of a lesser extent, but in the similar vein to Trent, deciding where Gakpo's best position is and where the new manager is going to play him is going to be huge in determining what Liverpool need in that front line, isn't it? Because if he plays on the left, then does Diaz maybe go over to the right? Yeah. Does Salah go into the middle? Where does Nunez fit into all of that? So I suppose that's a question for the new manager. I'd certainly like to see him given a run of games on the left, because, as you say, that's where he's excelled there for PSV and international level as well.
I suppose with the thing is as well, even if Diaz was to stay, or I suppose they're different wingers, aren't they? Yeah. I suppose like Diaz is someone he's more electric, he's more direct, whereas I think Gakpo's, I've heard a lot of players and managers say that he's very smart, very intelligent footballer, and I suppose you have to be if you are going to be a versatile player, and that almost worked against him last season, because he had the versatility to play down the middle, play midfield, play on the right, play on the left, and all of a sudden you find yourself kind of being everywhere. But you can think of games where you maybe City at Anfield last season, for instance. Diaz was electric that game, wasn't he? And it kind of felt like he was the one trying to drag Liverpool to victory. And then all of a sudden when Gakpo came on, it felt like that was when Liverpool kind of surrendered the game, or maybe happy to take a point. But maybe if you're playing a team away from home where you need a more physical presence, where you maybe going to have to sit in, maybe Gakpo's your man for that. And maybe it's at Anfield where you're playing teams who are, going to sit in and be of a lower block. That's maybe when you have Diaz. So, Theo was telling me the fixtures earlier today, and with the new Champions League games, Liverpool will play 67 games next season. So there is certainly a lot of football for both players. And as you say, it's the same with Trent, isn't it? That you kind of just need to find a position for these players, especially under a new regime as well. It feels like, obviously Klopp's 10 years, a line's been drawn in the sand now. It's time for slot to take Liverpool forward, and part of that will be kind of making decisions on Gakpo, Trent, and those kind of players.
Yeah, and Gakpo's only recently turned 25 as well, so still sort of he's just approaching his peak, I guess. So lots to be excited about for Liverpool fans with regard to him. Someone else in the Netherlands team who maybe hasn't had quite as a successful tournament is Virgil van Dijk. I mean, I saw him getting quite a lot of abuse online yesterday following that defeat to Austria. Probably wasn't his best game, it's fair to say. Didn't manage to make a successful tackle or interception. Didn't win a single ground duel, which is not the sort of statistics that we're used to seeing from Virgil. But all that being said, obviously we know that he is one of the players who is out of contract next season, at the end of next season rather. Talks hadn't started before he went off to the Euros. I imagine that's still probably the case. He seemed quite relaxed when he was asked about it, and it sort of seems like he's probably out of the three that are out of contract next summer in terms of him, Salah and Trent. He's probably going to be the easiest one to get sorted. How desperate would you be if you were the manager to get him tied down to a new deal?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think he's key, isn't he? And obviously Slot did his first interview with the Liverpool in-house media team last week, and he said that he hadn't spoken to a lot of players, but the one he had spoken to, well, the first one was Van Dijk. Obviously he's the captain, but he's obviously also Dutch as well, so that obviously made that conversation probably a lot easier than it will be reaching out to someone else. But I mean, as you say, there isn't really a saga hanging over Van Dijk's head in the same way that Trent and Salah have. I mean, with Salah, obviously you've got the Saudi Arabia pull and that, hanging over from last summer, and with Trent, you obviously got the pull of Real Madrid. He's kind of approaching the peak years of his career. Does he go and make a big money move somewhere else? But Van Dijk, you feel, he's 32, or 33, I think, next month actually, and it kind of feels like we've seen peak Van Dijk, and maybe he's on that slight decline. I mean, it was obviously still really good last season and a much improved Liverpool side. But I think when you read links in the media, which I'm sure we'll get onto shortly, of different centre halves across Europe, it kind of sees that makes sense that Liverpool have got one eye maybe on the on the next 5 years. And obviously, of course, you've got Gerard Quansah, who came through last season, but you've also got Ibrahima Konate, who a brilliant defender on his day, but has struggled for fitness over the the 3 or 4 years he's been at Liverpool. And you've got Joe Gomez, who you'd probably consider himself a fullback now, so you are short in that defensive department. Obviously Joel Matip's gone as well, so I think Van Dijk, I'd be really surprised if those talks, as you say, weren't pretty straightforward. And at this stage of his career, I mean, why would you not want to stay at Liverpool? You can almost be that father figure to the likes of Quansah and even, like I say, the young centre halves who might be coming to Liverpool. And I'm sure Van Dijk will relish that. Obviously he's a captain, leads by example. And as I say, it's an exciting new project. So, yeah, we'd definitely hope that kind of gets sorted soon. I mean, Slot said also last week that he'd been speaking to Richard Hughes. He hadn't just started the job on that day. There had been dialogue with kind of different departments. And I would be very shocked if Virgil van Dijk's name hasn't been kind of mentioned repeatedly. So, fingers crossed that's sorted before the start of the season, because I think it would be quite worrying. And, Van Dijk maybe a little less so, but I'd be very worried if all 3 of them weren't penned down by that first game at Ipswich in 6, 7, 8 weeks time, whenever that is.
Yeah, it's creeping up on us, isn't it? The start of the new season already. Regardless though of what happens with Virgil, it does seem like the club are going to move to try and get a centre back in this summer. It sort of felt like last summer it was something that they probably could have done with. Obviously, as you say, Jarell Quansah coming through really helped Liverpool, and credit to Jurgen Klopp and the coaching staff for nurturing him and bringing him through and having that faith in him. There's 2 names really when you sort of look at reports that seem to be really sort of sticking and having a little bit of truth to them, certainly in terms of Liverpool's interest. We've got Lenny Yoro, who has been linked with the club the last few months, seems to be one of the most exciting prospects in Europe, only 18 years old. He has been sort of touted to be going to Real Madrid, and we do sort of know that once Real Madrid get the claws into a player, it's quite difficult to tempt them to go elsewhere. But what are your thoughts on him? Have you seen much of him, and how confident are you that Liverpool could sort of tempt him away from Real Madrid's clutches?
I mean, yeah, it's going to be difficult, isn't it? I think Liverpool very much sound like they're kind of waiting in the wings. It doesn't sound like they're going toe-to-toe with Real Madrid at the minute. But, I mean, I think he was at the Champions League final last month to watch Real Madrid win a record Champions League. So that kind of probably was enough of an incentive to kind of sign on the dotted line. But yeah, from the reports that have come out, I mean, it sounds obviously like Lille very open to selling. Fonseca, who was the manager last season, said that he basically expected him to go. And I just think Real Madrid are maybe haggling over a fee, knowing that they maybe have that presence and the player wants to go. So I think you'd be surprised if it doesn't get done this summer. But in terms of him, he's and we'll get onto another centre half in a minute. He kind of fits the profile that Liverpool would be after. I mean, as you say, he's 18 years old, but he's played a season in France. He's got senior experience. He's played in the Conference League as well. A ball playing defender, someone who's comfortable at bringing the ball out. And as I say, you look at what Liverpool have lost in terms of Joel Matip, who was probably really, I mean, I know Quanta, is comfortable on the ball, but they haven't really had someone who can kind of move forward with it like that with such ease. And he maybe looks like someone who can do that. It's difficult, isn't it? Because this time last year, I remember saying that like Liverpool felt like they were leaving themselves a bit short, really, when they kind of didn't go after anyone after the Colwell. But I think this year, a centre half, you really argue that they need one. And whether Yoro would come in and play 30, 40 games, I'm not too sure. But it just means that after Quansah, after Kanate, after Van Dijk, you may be throwing, 10 Premier League games at him, the cup games at him, some of the later Champions League group stage games at him, because obviously there's 4 more this year. So there is plenty of football there for him to develop. He's not obviously going to be playing your games against City and Arsenal and United and all those kind of teams. But he's maybe one that it's maybe too good of an opportunity to turn down. Obviously, he's only got a year left on his contract. So, probably Leo's bargaining stance isn't as strong as it would have been last summer. So, yeah, I think it'll be a real coup if Liverpool were able to get it. But as we've seen in the past, not only on the pitch but off the pitch, Real Madrid seem to beat Liverpool to everything. So I'm not too confident that one will be done. But there's plenty of other names being mooted at the minute, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, I think Liverpool, as you say, sort of see Yoro as a little bit of a unique opportunity in the market in terms of he's a young player who's probably going to be available for a relatively reasonable fee, considering he is out of contract next summer, but has the ceiling and the potential to go on and be an exceptional talent. So definitely one to keep an eye on if he doesn't end up going to Real Madrid. I suppose if you want someone to come in and be maybe more of a ready-made starter, then you'd look to Riccardo Calafiori from Bologna, who has also been linked pretty heavily with Liverpool. He's obviously playing for Italy at the Euros. He scored an own goal, was quite unfortunate against Spain, but has played fairly well from what I've seen of him at the Euros. Now, again, Liverpool facing competition. There's been reports that he's close to agreeing a deal with Juventus. You would imagine, though, if Liverpool really wanted him, and we know that Richard Hughes has pretty extensive contacts in Italy, likes Italian football. If Liverpool really wanted him and really pursued him aggressively, they might be more likely to turn his head than they would, for example, Yoro.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's one that I'd maybe heard about but not watched too much of prior to the Euros. And I mean, obviously, you talk about the own goal he scored against Spain last week, but then the thing that I really liked is against Croatia the other night when Italy needed a goal to basically guarantee their spot in the last 16, and he brought the ball out from defence really well, and then he passes it off, and then the other lad scores a goal. So again, talking about players who fit the Liverpool profile, if you talk about a team that's going to have lots of possession, that's comfortable on the ball, bring the ball into midfield and make a pass, all the things that kind of Joel Matip used to do, just in that kind of like 10 or 15 seconds, he kind of ticked nearly every one of those boxes. That was kind of, really reassuring, and especially after scoring an own goal like the game before. I suppose that says a lot if you maybe clutching at straws, but a lot about his mentality really to kind of bounce back from that. But yeah, I mean, he's only 22. He was part of the Bologna side who qualified for the Champions League under Thiago Motta for the first time since its revamp. So that was obviously a huge achievement. I had a look earlier. They had the third best defensive record in Serie A. I think only Juventus and Inter Milan conceded fewer goals. So, it's a player who, yes, we've said they can get on the ball, can bring it forward and can start attacks, but he's also someone who clearly likes defending, is good at the basics. And I think that sometimes gets a bit lost in kind of modern football, doesn't it? I think, some defenders, think about attacking first, don't they, and then defending second. And, Italians obviously notorious for their kind of defensive style, aren't they? And, there's not a team that score a lot of goals, the Italian national team, but if they do win tournaments, as we saw with the Euros a few years ago, it's kind of built on those defensive partnerships, Bonucci and Chiellini that we saw for so many years. So you don't play for the Italian national team at 22 years of age if you're a bad defender. In terms of like other things, nearly 100 senior appearances, play for Basel and Roma as well before Bologna. So I know Paul Gorst, our Liverpool correspondent, spoke before that kind of there's a sweet spot that Liverpool like of young players who, they aren't just coming out of under 23s teams. They have got senior experience and exposure, and he certainly has that. So yeah, it's another one. It sounds like Juventus are sniffing around and have maybe got a foot in there. Talks of a 60 million euro deal, but as you say, there's one. It feels like one that Liverpool, if they were to pursue, will be a real statement of intent. Especially from the new manager, kind of putting his stamp on his team, but also one that would get you really excited for now and the future as well. We talked about Van Dijk's not, he's not going to be around forever. Konate, I think the jury's probably still out on him, which is maybe a bit harsh, but I just think his fitness is kind of let him down more times than it probably should have in his 3 or 4 seasons. And then obviously you've got Joe Gomez now, so it feels like there is a real opportunity for a young defender to come in this summer and really, as we saw with Quansah last year, if you are good enough, you are going to play an awful amount of games, aren't you?
Yeah, I suppose one of the most difficult things for the new manager coming in, for any manager coming into a squad, is assessing how much you need and what you need. And I suppose there's an argument that Liverpool already have 4 central defenders, if we're including Joe Gomez as part of that. But when you look at sort of the injury record of Joe Gomez and Konate, when you consider Van Dijk's getting older, when you consider Quansah has only had, a season of senior football really under his belt, plus a little bit of time on loan in League One, you do think that they do need something else, don't you?
It makes absolute sense. And as I say, it's with the Yoro one, as you said, it maybe feels like a bit of a unique deal where you can't really pass him up. He probably goes outside of the kind of the model that you'd normally buy, because if he had 2 or 3 years on his contract, we'd probably cost 60, 70, 80 million, wouldn't he? I mean, Lille will be able to demand whatever they wanted, but as for all the reasons you just mentioned, then Liverpool do need a centre half, and it feels like he could, Calafiori. I think I've said that all right, haven't I? It feels like he could be one who comes in straight away, because with Quansah, he's a player who you don't want to. Yes, he played a lot of games last season, and especially towards the end with Konate being injured. But I think with young players, you've got to be so careful, haven't you, with their development? It's not always linear. He's probably going to get injuries, and he's probably not always going to play as well as you did last season. So I think if you can kind of manage him well, play him some games, play him not, that kind of thing, especially with Liverpool going into the Champions League. I mean, that's going to be a huge test for him, considering he was playing in, League One 18 months ago. But, a young player who's played at the Euros, he's got experience in helping the team qualify for the Champions League. It all sounds really exciting. I mean, I had a look at a few of his stats earlier. Per 90, he managed averaged more interceptions than any of Liverpool's defenders. Joel Matip aside, so that was 1.92 per 90. He had a higher number of tackles per 90 as well, and he made more passes per 90 than Konate, Van Dijk and Gomez. So that kind of just shows you that he can do both sides of the game. He's obviously good at reading the game, making interceptions, starting counter-attacks, that kind of thing, but he's also comfortable enough to bring the ball out, as we saw the other night. So I think it's definitely a position that's a necessity this summer, but I suppose the profiling of who they're going to be is quite difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I like about Calafiori, I mean, no bearing on his football ability whatsoever, but he does look like a proper throwback Italian defender, doesn't he? Which I'm taking as a sign that he's going to turn into an absolute world beater. Just finally then, before we wrap up, we've been talking a little bit in the office earlier on about our dream transfers. We know obviously there's some clubs at the moment who are maybe trying to offload players and raise some funds ahead of the June 30th deadline. If you were going to bring any player in from any club across Europe in any position, who would it be? Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot there a little bit.
How long have we got? I don't know. It's difficult, isn't it? I think. I mean, the obvious world beaters aside, I think there's
yeah. We'll put sort of semi-realistic. Yeah, you can aim big, but not too big.
It's difficult, isn't it? I mean, if we're kind of sticking it to the Premier League and maybe saying clubs that might be under pressure, there's a few positions you'd probably look at. I think Liverpool's striking department, I still don't feel it's that reliable. Jota's a brilliant finisher, but again, misses probably too much football for my liking, and I think a lot of people's liking as well. I think Núñez is kind of as positive as last season was for 3 quarters. I think there's still question marks there of, whether he could really fire Liverpool to the biggest trophy. So you're probably looking at a striker. And then, for all the reasons I've just said before, about defenders, I think there's a real opportunity for someone to come in and kind of stamp their mark, and in the same way that Van Dijk did really in 2018, and come in and kind of be that statement sign. And I think there's a real opening for that this summer. So if you were to do, in terms of forwards, I mean, it probably contradicts what I've just said about Jota, but I really like Isak. And I know there's been talk today that Chelsea have perhaps inquired about a deal for him this summer, and supposedly been quoted in excess of 115 million. I mean, for that price, obviously, I don't think Liverpool would do it. But as they showed last summer with Caicedo, I suppose if the player's right and they feel it's an opportunity that they can't miss, they obviously will they will get the checkbook out, won't they? But yeah, he's a player that I think is, he can lead the line well. He can make runs off the shoulder. He can hold up play. I just think he's a real handful every time I've watched him. I remember his first game for Newcastle was at Anfield, and he scored a brilliant chip, and I think he scored another one which was ruled out for offside. So even from literally the first night he was in the Premier League, he's just been a handful. I think 35 goals across 2 seasons for a team like Newcastle, who typically aren't one of your kind of clubs competing at the top end of the Premier League. Elsewhere, I'm going to get a bad look from Ian Crowley, our producer, but I'm probably going to say Jared Branthwaite. I think he's brilliant. Ian will obviously know far better than me, but every time I've watched him this season, but most impressively in the derby at Goodison, I thought he was absolutely brilliant. Both-footed, can play the ball at his feet, can bring the ball out, can spray a pass, can dominate big forwards. I just think Joe Thomas, the Everton correspondent, has written it a few times that he's kind of a future England captain in the making, and probably got absolutely no doubts about that. I just think he's kind of got everything, but again, how likely is that to be done? But they're the two, if we're talking Premier League and in maybe clubs that are under pressure before this weekend. I think Branthwaite and Isak are the two, but I mean they'd obviously come at huge cost, wouldn't they? But yeah, if I was in charge and I had the checkbook, they were two I'd be looking at this summer.
Yeah, but I would be interested to see if Everton would even consider selling Branthwaite to Liverpool. I can't see that one happening, but I agree he's a top class defender, and can't quite believe that he's not made the Euro squad. But anyway, I think I'm going to sort of sticking with the Everton theme. I'm probably going to go with Anthony Gordon, actually, because I'll hold my hands up and say that when Newcastle sort of spent upwards of 40 million on him, I was slightly bemused by that. I thought, I'm not quite sure he's worth that. He started very well at Everton, and then probably in line with the whole team sort of struggled, and I was surprised to see him move for such a big money deal, but now that looks like a bit of a bargain for Newcastle, doesn't it? And I thought even he was on the pitch a matter of minutes, wasn't he, last night? And I thought he made a difference. So I
think he's added goals and assists to his game. That's the big thing. I think at Everton, you could always kind of see the quality, but the kind of the biggest, maybe the one gripe you maybe have is that he probably didn't produce the numbers to back up his performances. But I mean, just looking at his stats here, 11 goals, 10 assists for Newcastle last season, in all competitions. Brilliant, and obviously deserves a place in the England squad, doesn't he? And as you say, when he came on last night, he was, the chalk and cheese between him and Foden, and it was probably in a matter of minutes he was already kind of getting in behind and kind of a nuisance for that Slovenia backline. So yeah, he's one that I'm sure. I mean, there has been links, to be fair, hasn't there, to Liverpool, so it will be interesting to see how that would go down.
Childhood Liverpool fan as well, so bring him back to Anfield.
I think Ian Crow will be outside his house with a pitchfork if that was to happen.
Yeah, I mean, we can dream, can't we? We'll see who indeed Liverpool do sign over the summer, in the coming weeks. We'll be back as well in a couple of weeks to sort of hopefully pick up. There might be a signing or two to discuss then, and we'll be deeper into the Euros as well. So hopefully we'll have seen Trent have a couple of good games for England. But thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you soon.